Hello and welcome. My name is Meepolis, they, she, he, and this is Literally Graphic. And today we are looking at The Parakeet by Espé, translated by Hannah Shute, originally published in French back in 2017. This graphic memoir was published in English by Graphic Mundi, Drawing Our World Together, an imprint of Pennsylvania State University Press, in 2021. The Parakeet also came to my attention because it was nominated for a Best U.S. Edition of International Material in 2022. Content notes for suicidality, falling downstairs, losing teeth, bipolar, asylum, images of Playmobil made out to be racial stereotypes of indigenous people, and loss of a parent. Not a comic rated in the traditional sense, but fairly emotionally intense, and at my library at least, shelved in the adult section. Flipping over to the back of the book, the author is described as, quote, born Bastien in Mazemais, France, a graduate of the École des Beaux-Arts in Toulouse. He collaborated in the publication of several comic series, including Chateau Bordeaux, and is the creator of L'Île des Justices. End quote. Please forgive my horrible French pronunciation. I technically have a fairly long streak going on Duolingo French, but it's hardly made a real dent in my ignorance. Keywords that came to mind reading this book: childhood, family, reproduction, loss, and making sense. The summary on Goodreads is, quote, Bastien is 8 years old and his mother is ill. She often has what his father and grandparents call episodes. She screams and fights, scratches and spits, and has to be carted away to specialized clinics for frequent treatment. Bastien doesn't like it when she goes, because when she comes home, she isn't the same. She has no feelings, no desires, and not much interest in him. According to the doctors, Bastien's mother suffers from bipolar disorder with schizophrenic tendencies, but he prefers to imagine her as a comic book heroine, like Jean Grey, who may become Dark Phoenix and explode in a superhuman furor at any moment. Based on the creator's own childhood experiences, The Parakeet is the story of a boy whose only refuge from life's harsh realities lies in his imagination. In his eyes, we see the confusion and heartache he feels as he watches his mother's illness worsen and the treatments fail. Through his eyes, we see how mental illness can both tear families apart and reaffirm the bonds of love. Poignant, yet playful, The Parakeet follows Bastien's struggle to accept the mother he has while wishing for the mother he needs. End quote. Looking at the writing, it was extremely effective, recreating the powerlessness and naive perspective of a child. I was pleasantly surprised by the positive/imaginative spin Bastien's school peers put on the stories they hear from him about his mother. Not to say that the book turns away from the negative parts of Bastien's life, but I guess I would have expected children to further ostracize him for having a mother with bipolar, so it was nice. It's also made extremely clear that Bastien's family supports and loves his mother, who is named Marie. I also appreciated the way we got to see Marie loving her son. The art was simple, but very well done. I appreciated how the single color changed from chapter to chapter. The pages were varied enough to easily keep my attention, but not in any way that might make them the least bit hard to follow. An outsider looking in, The Parakeet is centered around the mental health diagnosis and treatment of Marie. I don't recall the time period coming up at all, but Espé himself was born in 1974, so it seems likely modeled on French care in the late 70s and through the 80s. As someone who works outside the mental health field and across the pond, it's a bit hard to place this book in a larger context. I really want to be optimistic about how mental health treatments have improved, but I am consistently reminded in my day-to-day life at how many people continue to be failed by the culture we live in. Although that is certainly not all on the mental health industry, even if it manifests in ways we categorize as mental health. Doctors can't prescribe housing, for instance, and the supports we offer people who can't work require living far below the poverty line. Not that either of those things really relate to the story of Bastien and Marie, but you know me and tangents. To wrap this thought up, I can't help but find the difference between how people talk about their negative experiences with electroshock therapy and the glowing ways it is described on medical websites a bit concerning. In describing his mother's life, we get a diagnosis, but there is still a bit of a blur around events. As I mentioned earlier, Espé really hones in on the powerless and naive understandings of being a child in this situation, which I sometimes find frustrating, but I felt balanced out in the vignettes that Espé chose to show. It still felt like the experience was being curated, and he wasn't just vomiting the facts back at us. This certainly shouldn't be the only book on bipolar schizophrenia one should ever read. I appreciated it was blurbed by fellow graphic medicine creator Rachel Lindsay, whose book RX, a graphic memoir, is a more first-person story of bipolar diagnosis, although occurring much more recently and more in my area of the world. Link in the cards to my review. Class was not deeply analyzed per se in the book, but Espé does highlight some vignettes that have to do with work. At one point, Marie's former co-workers stop by to chat about how things will be fine when she returns to work soon, only to be confronted by a mental health crisis that none of them are prepared for. The second story, again, of an outsider grossly underestimating the seriousness of the situation. We see a social worker stop by the house who is very skeptical of Marie's lack of productivity, as it were. Race was very one note, as these things do sort of go, although with some very dated/dubious Playmobil toys making appearances. And while everyone in this book is apparently very heterosexual, and heterosexual reproduction/family are fairly central, I did appreciate that binary gender roles went largely ignored. Because of Marie's struggle to care for her son, who she loves deeply, Bastien is often in the care of his grandparents, and both his father and grandfather seem to share in child-rearing tasks. And to conclude, I think I will go with 4 out of 5 stars, a very tough read full of emotions and love. Bye y'all, keep reading and organized, and capitalist depression. And Literally Graphic is created on land that should be given back to the traditional landholders, which in this case is, to my knowledge, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, an Anishinaabe people, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat Nation.